Now, if we turn towards the situation in Europe, proponents of the EU fiscal compact say it can enforce budget discipline, help prevent another debt crisis. You've criticised this as just being empty. Why do you think it won't work?
I mean, first of all, it's a rerun of the Stability and Growth Pact that fell apart as soon as there was pressure put on it. France and Germany said, well, we can't quite meet the target, and then they got together and they changed the rules. I think that could happen again. But to be more specific, what the legislation, what this treaty calls for is a deficit of no more than 0.5% of GDP, unless there are unusual circumstances, and somehow or other the accounting of this 0.5% allows a country to exclude one-off activities. Well, what's a one-off activity? Is a one-off activity you're building a road, which you're not going to build a road again? Sounds like a one-off activity. So if you're going to pursue fiscal stimulus in one-off terms, you don't count that. Now, all this is supposed to be decided by the European Court of Justice. I wouldn't want to go as an expert witness to that court and say, well, when they get to a 14% unemployment rate, that's full employment, and that's when they should be under 0.5%, when somebody else could argue, well, no, until they get to 8%, they're not there. So I think it's a totally unenforceable idea. I think it accomplishes nothing other than giving the political folks bragging rights that they have signed yet another treaty.
Now, since the Eurozone was first conceived, you've been fairly critical of having a single currency mechanism for countries with unequal growth and productivity levels. You said that the euro is a flawed currency concept to begin with. So what's the best way forward?
Well, best way forward is to go back in history and start all over again. But you can't do that. So they're stuck with it. I think it's one thing for a small country like Greece, in which the situation is really desperately bad, to leave. It's another thing for countries like Italy and Spain and France, where the situation is remediable, still not as good as it would be if they could set their own monetary policy, still not as good as it would be if they could have a flexible exchange rate. But it's not so bad that they should bring down the house. And so I think they will just muddle through, things not working as well as they should, but I don't think they will, and I don't think they should, break up the monetary union.
Now, if we bring China into the picture here, how vulnerable, how susceptible is China to what's going on, the whole situation in Europe?
Not very. I think the Chinese showed when the crisis hit a few years ago that they have the tools for managing domestic demand to maintain employment, to maintain growth.
China has said that it's willing to get more involved in the Eurozone crisis. Do you think it should?
Well, what they said was, after they have fixed their situation, we're prepared to come and invest and lend. Well, there's a big after in that. So they are not rushing to waste money lending to countries that might not pay it back. But as they begin to see progress, yes, they've talked about diversifying their holdings of foreign exchange out of dollars. That makes good sense. The question is, where do you go? And it has to be into the euro. China owns a substantial share of German Eurobonds. So at some point they have to look and say, well, maybe Italy is making serious progress. We can go and buy some Italian Eurobonds. Or maybe we're now seeing significant progress someplace else, and we can go and buy those bonds. So I think that's the role that China is likely to play in this, a really peripheral role.
Now, earlier this year, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao officially lowered China's growth target from 8% down to 7.5%. There have been concerns over a hard landing with a property bubble. Some people say China's already in a hard landing. What's your view on this?
Well, last year the target was 8. They made 9. So this year the target's 7.5. Wouldn't be surprising if it came out as 8. But I think the key shift in the goal from just high growth per se to a restructuring of the composition of growth here in China makes a lot of sense, and makes sense not for international reasons but for domestic reasons, to be able to increase the share of GDP that's going in household incomes, to increase the share of household incomes that's consumed rather than saved. All of that makes great sense.
That's right. As China tries to rebalance its economy, what do you see as the major challenges along that route, and how big a disruption could it cause to the economy?
I don't think it need do that. I think that the government's been signaling to manufacturers that the opportunities for exports are going to diminish, part because the world is slowing down, in part because the renminbi has gotten stronger. And I think the main mechanism by which we're going to see this increasing household income and increasing share of GDP going to consumption will be a byproduct of urbanization and of the expansion of services. So you're going to take, what, 2/3 of the Chinese are still on farms with very, very low income. You're going to take each year significant numbers of those people out of subsistence agriculture into township or into cities where they'll be working in light industry or be working in the service sector, earning a lot more than they did before, and that will generate higher incomes and higher consumption.
Now, on the currency issue, how much of it has it become a purely political issue instead of an economic one?
Well, in the United States, it's a very easy thing to focus on. It's the one thing that somehow, if you need a one-word way of describing the problem, you can say, their currency is undervalued. But it is certainly not a substantial problem now. After all, the renminbi is up something like 30% since they first started floating it in 2005.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.